It still had to be my decision the way we went, you know, because I was the mug out the front that they threw stuff at. I'm the first to get the beer can in the head if they start throwing stuff, you know. I get blamed for everything.
And the fact that there was a little bit of bile in there, you know, in fact, I think that's what the best groups have got, a bit of that, you know. In fact, I used to rather encourage it.
I'm not complaining about having been in a band that's made some good records and done some good gigs and by and large had a good time. He has got the wrong end of the stick, really.
Oh, no, wait a minute, love. Well, you can't ignore him. There's no ignoring this guy.
Despite the unpleasantness surrounding the Attractions' diminished role on King of America, it seems to have been a transitional album for Elvis, who is now in a happier and more buoyant frame of mind than he had been for years. Recently divorced from his first wife, he was about to marry Cot O'Riordan, bass player from the Pogues, whose second album Elvis had produced. As well as resolving the turbulence of his personal life, the relationship had a liberating effect on his songwriting.
I think the effect it has is more being happier in your life, being, you know, with somebody most of the, well, nearly all of the time, and traveling together a lot. The songs could be more outward looking. The effect was the opposite of being more personal and not sort of like documenting your life through the songs. It's rather the opposite, rather free from that writing about tatty little affairs in code, you know, which was some of my work, to actually being able to be free of really writing about such things and really just living the life and writing about other things, you know, which meant that the subject matter could become renewed. You know what I mean? You might write a song. It might take you a little while to write a song which is very personal because you're really not prepared to confront some of the feelings in it, you know. Other times it all just comes tumbling out when you're feeling it. Other times you have to reflect on it and you make a better job of the writing of it because in some way you're distanced from it, but you don't feel it any less for that. And I suppose that's most of the stuff on Blood and Chocolate comes in that way.
Complicated, from Elvis's second album of 1986, Blood and Chocolate. This was not only a reconciliation with his estranged group The Attractions, but also a reunion with Nick Lowe, who had produced the first 5 Costello albums, but missed the next 5.
There was a danger in going back with the, you know, with using Nick Lowe again and going for a very simplistic musical sound. I mean, I was writing songs like using the table as a rhythm section, you know. I mean, I wasn't even resorting to anything as sophisticated as a guitar with some of the songs on Blood and Chocolate. I was really trying to write the songs as simply as possible. So, like, some of them were just like chants, you know, and others were more melodic, you know. And I had to get the agreement of the group that we were going to approach it like this, you know, that we wouldn't start losing our nerve, which is what the failing of the previous record with The Attractions had been. So we agreed to do that with Olympic Studios. The big old room at Olympic Studios, which has now been vandalised, was a terrific place for that. We had a setup where we used stage monitors. We didn't use any headphones or anything, so it was really just like recording a rehearsal, because that's the way you'd rehearse in a rehearsal studio. Inevitably what you get is a tremendous amount of spillage. And there's a certain, you know, it's something that engineers have difficulty understanding, you know, because they're obviously trying to get everything on tape as clean as possible. And, you know, some will go along the route of distortion, but when you're talking about willfully damaging the balance to achieve a certain effect, sometimes you have to really press engineers to willfully distort things.
Nick Lowe.
We tried to do that on Blood and Chocolate, and I don't think it was entirely successful, that record. You know, I think when it was successful, it really was great. It was a much more uptight sort of situation because we all had a break from each other. We'd all calmed ourselves down quite a lot. You know, we weren't in quite the same sort of gang. You know, there wasn't such a gang feeling as some of the earlier records that we'd done together. And EC was, I guess he was trying to sort of take charge to help. You know, he was trying to help and thought that he better, as he got everyone back together again and calmed everyone down. Although I never really knew what their internal arguments and things were. They had plenty of that, Lord knows, you know. But I never really noticed, to be quite honest. I thought that all added to it, you know, the fact that there was a little bit of bile in there, you know. In fact, I think that's what the best groups have got, a bit of that, you know. In fact, I used to rather encourage it, to be quite honest, you know. As soon as it gets all cosy, you know, then you wind up sounding like, I don't know, Chicago or Genesis or one of those outfits, you know, who all obviously all really like each other. And, you know, you can't make any decent music if you really like each other, you know, I don't think. You can't really do something that's going to make people go, what's that? If you're all really cozy.
I probably annoyed the group more on that record and was more single-minded than any other record. I just wouldn't bend at all from the sound I had in my head. And it meant really a difficult job for Steve Naive, because I was basically asking him to play a completely backseat role on the record for the first time. I mean, he had such a lot of freedom on, particularly the records made with Clive Lang and Alan Winstanley. To some degree, I think almost, you know, that I sometimes left the studio, particularly during Goodbye Cruel World, and let him do Overdose, which I later didn't really like, but, you know, they'd done the work and I lived with them. Now, on Blood and Chocolate, I asked Steve just to play organ and piano, no synthesizer, to use as little other keyboard as possible, and basically play like a rhythm roll all the way through. There were no solos, and there were no real piano parts in the way that he had been featured in the past. There were no guitar parts either. There was just a big drone, you know. That was the whole sound. And I think it was difficult for him, you know. It was difficult for him to accept. And I think the distance started to really build up then, you know, with the different musicians. And they maybe thought I was just being perverse.
Attractions bass player Bruce Thomas.
That was, you know, an attempt to kind of rediscover the virtues of those songs like Pump It Up and Big Tears or something, the good old Attractions thrashes, which really worked then because they worked then, you know. I don't know if you can ever really redo anything like that, but we had a go. I mean, it's got a certain charm to it, but it's not really a wonderful album, I don't think. It doesn't have a lot of heart in it. I mean, I thought Elvis was trying really hard to do the psychopath in I Want You and all that, things like that. He really annoy me, you know. He loves all that stuff, that fingernails scratching down the wall and I want you, oh yeah, oh, I'm gonna, you know, this sort of Tony Perkins job, and I'll give you the address of a good analyst, you know. But I don't know why, you know, that's not soul-bearing or honest, it's just neurotic. I found it incredibly neurotic and tension-inducing, which he'd say is entirely the point, but I thought, well, that's not the point of self-expression, surely, at the end of the day.
As Elvis said, Blood and Chocolate was an ambient recording, using stage monitors instead of headphones, and to minimise spillage, where one instrument leaks into the microphone serving another, the four musicians were positioned as far from each other as possible. Attractions drummer Pete Thomas.
Bruce was a good 25 feet from me, so it wasn't like you've got the bass next to you. It's like you're hearing the bass almost after the event. You know, I think he wanted to get a bit of a Phil Spector-y sort of thing to it. Sometimes that was hard, you know, sometimes when we were rocking out, it was like hard to quite find the groove. But then there's other tracks on that album, like I Want You is a really good example of, like, at the end when it gets quieter and quieter, I mean, that's all live. You can hear me, like, leaning over the drums, you know, to try and sort of, you know, he was there going, I want you, I want you, know, and I'm trying to find this little beat to put in there, and the tension of that, you know, of all these people, like, straining, you know, it's like, well, if I go tip there, you know, and bing there, and it's getting quieter and quieter, I mean, that is a great moment that, you know, as that song tails off, it's like all these people go, you know, you can't play a wrong thing. I mean, you can tell that he's really going for it, you know, like this is the most deeply sensitive thing you've ever heard in your life, you know. It's like, so everyone's laying out more and more, you know. So that was probably like a good thing about doing it like that.
I want you, the truth can't hurt you.
Far from being the happy reunion anticipated by their fans, Blood and Chocolate was to be the last album that Elvis and the Attractions would make together. After a decade on the road, the singer's desire to take some time off, away from the treadmill of touring and recording, meant releasing the others to pursue their own careers. Inevitably, this caused a fair amount of bitterness.
it was like realizing that we weren't as close friends as you might have assumed. It was something that was always unspoken. We never were particularly, friendly, like we didn't spend lots of time together. We weren't on the road, but we were thrown together so much through constantly touring. You assumed that there was a very strong bond, and I think in the minds of the other guys, we were much more of a group, like we were a group as the Rolling Stones are a group. There's a leader, but there's still a group, rather than what it really was me and a really great group, which wasn't my backup group. It was a group I thought of. I mean, they were all better musicians than me, technically speaking, but it still had to be my decision the way we went, because I was the mug out the front, and that they threw stuff at. I'm the first to get the beer can in the head if they start throwing stuff, and it's my name first on the market. I get blamed for everything.
Bruce Thomas.
Elvis went a bit peculiar when he didn't kind of know whether he wanted to sack us or not. But after about 12 albums and 40-odd tours, I thought this is a bit of a naff way to go on. And then he went, he did the famous incident is he took us all out to Christmas lunch, and I thought, we're going to get a gold watch and stuff, and just basically said if you thought it was you guys, you were wrong. It was always down to me. It was always down to the songs. And he went in and stuck a bass solo on one song and replaced Knives keyboards on another song. This is on the Blood and Chocolate album, and basically said thanks but no thanks and do as you're told, and Steve took it very, very badly, which is probably why he'll have great difficulty even now getting him to speak, because he was very deeply affected by it. And I, for my part, sided with him more than Elvis. I thought Elvis was totally out of order, and I felt very bad for Steve.
Pete Thomas.
The trouble is, you see, that we didn't understand, I think. I mean, basically, I think when the Attractions got knocked on the head, it was a fairly straightforward sort of business decision. I think he needed to find a lot of money for other things, suddenly. And he was sick to death of touring, and obviously with the same people all the time. There was nothing new about it, and we had been at it pretty hard. Below that, there was an enormous wealth of love, I think it's because basically those were the best years of our lives, from when you're 21 to 30 or something, and we played together all the time and went through all those experiences together. I mean, how could it not be like a marriage or something, And he was trying to explain to us, well, we'll still work, but, I just can't afford the salaries anymore. I can't afford to pay you guys this much. He basically needed some time off to get his life sorted out. And he wanted to take a year off. And to pay everyone's salary for a year would have broke him. But the trouble was that we couldn't see it clearly, and I was still drinking, so every time I got worried about it I'd get drunk, and then he'd just get irrational about it, And it did hurt. I mean, it really hurt. And I'm sure he knew it would, but it was just one of those things. At the time, anyway, it seemed like the right thing to do for him.
As a result of his connections with T-Bone Burnett, who was producing tracks for Roy Orbison's new album, Elvis modified a song he'd recorded on Goodbye Cruel World. He thought it would be perfect for Orbison, and it was.
For somebody who's written 200 odd songs, I've had very few covers, but the quality of the covers that I've had is incredible. If I'd written a note to myself in 1973, some of my favourite singers, I hope they one day record my songs, it would have been like a wish list that had come true. George Jones, Johnny Cash, Dusty Springfield, Georgie Fame, Chet Baker, Roy Orbison and Roger McGuinn. That's pretty good going, That's only a handful of people, but they're enough good singers,
And if in 1963 you'd asked the 9-year-old Declan McManus, as he was then, to name his favourite group, he would undoubtedly have said the Beatles, whose records were the first he ever owned. Never could he have imagined that he would one day be strumming an acoustic guitar, much as John Lennon might have done, writing songs with Paul McCartney.
After all those years with John, it's lovely to have a collaborator. And even though I'm happy to write on my own, and a lot of my stuff that I used to do was written on my own, then John and I would kind of check each other's individual songs. But still, the act of sitting down with a collaborator, just with a friend, and working over something always appealed to me a lot, For no other reason, it just makes it twice as easy. half the time it seems to just take, because the other person, as long as the other person's good. You see, I mean, the way I look at Elvis is he's a John fan. It's terrible to reduce him to that, but when you were in the Beatles, people do reduce themselves to that. They were either a Paul fan or a George fan. Now, those were serious types. They were different types of people, or a Ringo fan, and whatever, and it could be anyone who could be attracted to these, but you could kind of tell, and I can tell in Elvis's whole stance, his whole attitude, his whole singing thing. It's all there, it's all like, it's sort of Johnish. And of course that was very attractive for me. That's another thing that was attractive.
My brave, my brave.
The first examples of the McCartney-Costello songwriting partnership appeared on records by Paul. Back on My Feet was the B-side of his top 10 hit Once Upon a Long Ago in 1987, and 4 more songs, including My Brave Face, helped make Flowers in the Dirt his most favourably received album of the late 80s.
We just sat very much as we are now, just 2 couches on either side of a table with a notebook and a tape recorder and 2 guitars. Just kind of as you'd expect to write songs. Or occasionally we'd go to the piano if we needed a piano to, if the piano seemed to be the instrument that we needed to base a song from. And then we just got down to it, and both of us came with at different times in the first couple of sessions with half-finished material, or sometimes almost 3/4 finished material, and we finished off the songs, and that was a very good way of finding out about the little foibles of the working methods.
That's how it actually started, was with half songs. He had Veronica, I think, half of that. At that particular point in time, I thought that what he was showing me as a suggestion for a song was tending to ramble a bit, and being within his own mind, be a marvellous story within his own mind, like a sort of rather deep poem or something that's lovely. At the 50th reading, you go, oh, I get it. She's fine, but I thought, no, that's not really what we're doing here. We have to be a bit more direct. Tell the people what you mean, Deck. Tell them what you're trying to tell them, give them a hook. Slam them a little hook on the end of that line. Go on, they'll love it, you'll love it.
The ideas of Veronica were already pretty much formed, and the good thing that Paul contributed to that was really sort of making me very hard on the storytelling. People have a funny idea of him as a lyricist. They often say, well, a lot of the lyrics are very simple or trite or something, but he's hard on himself technically. He's hard particularly on a collaborator technically. He doesn't admit things like false rhymes, and doesn't like uneven structure. I mean, if you look at some of the songs I've written, particularly around Get Happy, they were maddening for the band to have to learn, because every verse is a different structure. Because I would change the structure of the song at will to accommodate one extra line in that verse that I wanted to put in. I didn't admit any rules. And working on Veronica, all that kind of stuff was forbidden, which was good. I think it made the song better for that.
Released in 1989, Veronica took off in America, giving Elvis a wholly unexpected top 20 hit.
I mean, it was made a hit by video, totally. And in the strangest way. I mean, I made a video in Australia with Evan English. I was very open about the fact that the song was based on my grandmother, and the way in which you want to believe that when people have Alzheimer's or senile, as people say, that there is some spirit or intelligence that they're unable to communicate, a bit like autism or something, And he made a very, very good little film that sort of illustrated some of those ideas, and without trying to match every line in the song, and without necessarily trying to dictate to the listener what to think about the song, and complemented the song very well in a way that's uncommonly intelligent, given how idiotic so many videos are. And at first, of course, it was totally rejected by MTV in America because it had old people in it. That was as simple as that. I mean, it had 2 old people. It had the old lady who was, representing the character of the song, and me, and it just didn't fit the bill. And then the sort of VH1, which is the sort of older people's MTV, that was the audience that song appeared to hit out of the blue, and it's sort of a very minor phenomenon, I mean, I was on aeroplanes that summer on tour, and the stewardess would come up and recognise me and be really emotional about the song because it had paralleled something I liked. And I had to say, I can't believe it's as simple as this. But I had to sort of, be less cynical about it. I mean, I was being very sceptical about that people were sentimentalising something, which of course meant a lot to me, but they weren't. And then, of course, the record started to become a success, and MTV had to bow to the inevitable and started to play it as well. And then it was like a top 20 record. I was astounded.
As Veronica demonstrated, Paul McCartney's presence had a definite impact on Elvis's writing style, so presumably he in turn affected the way Paul's songs turned out.
Buggered him up, totally messed him up. I was going great till I met him. He's ruined every idea I ever had. Now, he was... what did he do? He would have a good opinion on it. If I was going up, a blind alley, or was using a word that he didn't like, he's got very strong opinions about certain things, not all of which I agree about, but most of which I gave into, because that's why you work with a collaborator. You don't want to sit and argue, really. There was one time when I went home after a session and thought, God, he really shouted me down there. So I came in the next day and said, hey, now look, you shouted me down yesterday. And I'm going along thinking, he's right, because he's shouting louder. And then I went home and thought, he wasn't right at all. So stuff you, and he took it very well. He said, oh, yeah, I do that a bit,
Sometimes I know I annoyed him, by maybe being a bit more outspoken than I needed to be, or I just sing very loud. The problem is that when I'm in the room, I sing so loud, I can't do anything about it. He has a very high voice, and if I sing up in the same register as him, my voice gets obnoxiously loud in a domestic circumstance.
You say, you're going to give us a song? Don't you get Veronica? Spitting all over the place. He's, oh, bloody hell. Hell, no, wait a minute, love. And I'm going, well, I'm back on my feet again. Back on my feet. He's right there. You go, bloody hell. Well, you can't ignore him. There's no ignoring this guy.
Pads, Paws and Claws, another McCartney-Costello collaboration, which, like Veronica, appeared on Spike. This album marked the beginning of his relationship with Warner Brothers, a major label willing to give him the biggest advance of his career and with enough power to bring his work to the world market. His boldest and most expensive record to date, Spike was recorded in Dublin, New Orleans, Los Angeles and London, with musicians flown in regardless of cost. It succeeded in eating up the entire budget and more, but brisk sales quickly justified his extravagance. Co-producing the album was T-Bone Burnett.
I think Elvis was trying to do so much with it, Elvis has been through a lot of phases, wouldn't you say? And he was just entering into a new phase at that point, in which I think he was getting harmonically much more complex, and it was a very dark record. Almost every song was minor on the whole record, And it was a very compositional record, much more so than the other one I worked on, King of America, or probably any of the other records he's done.
One of the quirkiest songs on the album was God's Comic.
I wrote God's Comic on a ship. I went on a holiday, which is kind of a rare occurrence for me. I don't really like holidays. But I found a cruise ship you could go on. I'd never been on one of those either, and I don't think I'd ever do it again. So it was like a sort of nightmare. The on-board part of it, it was like a floating holiday camp or something. But it afforded the opportunity to go to Greenland, which is somewhere I wanted to really go to. And, of course, it really takes, like I'm sure this is the instinct. I mean, I'm not really equipped or intrigued by becoming an explorer. But I'm sure that's what drives people to go to these places, that it takes you out of what we laughingly call civilization, and it opens your imagination to different kinds of stimulus, and out of it came the song God's Comic. Well, several songs I wrote while I was on the holiday, But I don't imagine God's Comic would have occurred to me any other time, really, because it's not really like any other song I've ever written, And it's a fantasy song about a musical turn who imitates a drunken priest and goes up to heaven and meets God, and God lectures him about everything that he's done wrong. It's sort of a comic afterlife song. God is sampling our wares, really. And, he's got an 8-track and a waterbed and a couple of Barry Manilow records, all the good stuff.
The The subject matter on Spike ranged from the surreal humour of God's Comic to the vitriolic fury of Tramp the Dirt Down, directed in no uncertain terms at Margaret Thatcher.
The point of it is trying to make some use of that anger rather than it just being something that incapacitates you. I don't think we'll ever see the back of it, really. I mean, we've seen the back of her, thankfully, but she had become so ludicrous that she was in danger of undoing a lot of the wicked things that she had done, just simply by her own belligerence and, blindness. Whenever you look back at any political era, and I don't really want to, come on like I'm a big political expert or anything, but it is true to say if you look back at a lot of, fairly recent political history, it's hard to imagine how certain people ever got away with it. And the same thing, I think, will happen in retrospect with Margaret Thatcher. I think far from being this great historic leader, I think she'll be more akin to Stanley Baldwin, somebody who we're slightly ashamed of. Writing a song like this is a real emotional response to events. It's the same as writing about anything that moves you. Could be something that happens to you, something you observe. This happens to be something that happened to everybody at once, but this thought didn't occur to everybody the same way as it did to me, That really is one of the ones where it's get the thing out of your head, before it does you some damage, And I think the things that she has done or she brought about, that she visited on society as a whole, we'll never ever recover from. I think the things that have been done, the dismantling of this invisible society that she said was invisible, is truly wicked. I think it's evil. I think it's beyond politics, and it's into morality. I can only see things getting grimmer. You only have to go to Europe to see that. Everything is, there's much more, people are much more at ease with themselves in Europe than they are in England. That's why I don't live in England.
I saw a newspaper.
Tramp the Dirt Down from Spike. After the disintegration of the Attractions, Bruce Thomas put aside his bass and took up his pen. Published in 1990, The Big Wheel was a novel about life on the road in a rock band. A rock band with a self-absorbed singer, a naive keyboard player, a loony drummer, a philosophical bass player, and a fierce manager by the name of Johnny Saint-Tropez.
He wrote this awful kind of pretend novel that was really a whinging memoir, and I felt a bit sorry, really, because it basically said that he wasted 10 years of his life because it was just a dreadful drag to be in this group where he was tricked and betrayed all the time. And I felt very sad there was no mention of music in it, for one thing. Well, one thing, for all of the arguments and any bitterness you ever feel, which everybody has fallings out with the people they work with, is that you must have moments of great happiness,
I'm not complaining about having been in a band that's made some good records and done some good gigs and by and large had a good time. Really, I mean, what I was whinging about was just the debilitatingness of endless touring, which is what in fact, I started germinating that book in about 1981, at the height of a touring and the height of the madness, when everyone was getting ill, and we were on a bus with Squeeze doing a tour, 18 people on a bus and nowhere to sleep and nowhere to sit, and that was why I did it. But it's not a whinge about being in the band. It's not even a whinge about any of the other guys or any of that. He has got the wrong end of the stick, really, and I mean, you have to put this in perspective. I did share a room with the guy for 6 years as well, so I know him pretty much as well as anybody else can. And I know that he would be more upset by me saying that he was overweight and he was sweaty than by cataloguing endless misdeeds. So it was really just to deflate him, but it was also not just, the book wasn't written just for that, just to have a go at Elvis. I mean, he's not the main character in the book anyway, although he likes to sort of elevate himself to that. He's not, I am.
The sun struggles up.
The Other Side of Summer was the lead track from Elvis Costello's most recent album, Mighty Like a Rose. As you'd expect, he once again had a very clear concept for the way the record should sound, most obviously in the musical arrangement of the songs. His studious interest in the landmark records of rock music led him to adopt as a role model the innovative production style devised by Brian Wilson for the Beach Boys in the 60s.
A lot of the things that I was trying to do on Mighty Like a Rose were the ideas. I wasn't trying to copy Brian Wilson, but I was trying to use some of the same way in which he would take a keyboard line and then colour it with a bass clarinet. So we'd put an unlikely orchestral instrument sometimes in the mix. It wouldn't be like right in your face, you know. So there are songs which started out very much as spontaneous performances, but I just wanted to sort of illuminate them a little bit with just this extra instrumentation from time to time.
All grown up. Further visits to Paul McCartney's pastoral retreat yielded another batch of co-written songs. Some have been earmarked for future McCartney records, but 2 appear on Mighty Like a Rose. To the delight of many listeners, one of them, So Like Candy, bore a pleasing similarity to the Beatles' best work.
Any songs which have any kind of Beatle inflection, those things came from me. And funnily enough, the tendency to want to put words in a stream and a kind of single repetitive pulse usually came from Paul, which would be something that people would say, oh, well, that's from Pump It Up or something, but he's done that before, that stream of words thing, you know. So we kind of switch roles in some of the writing. You know, I'm not saying that's an absolute condition, but I think that was true of Candy. So I find it hard to remember who wrote what. You know, it was one that happened very quickly. I remember that much. So it's hard to pin down who said what, you know.
It got to be about sort of a sexy girl, really. A relationship was sort of quite sort of sexy, model-y kind of girl. That's always, I always find it kind of good to imagine that. I've done that in songs before, like Another Day is a bit that. It's a girl getting showered and having a cup of coffee and stuff, and I'm being a bit voyeuristic, really, watching her in this little Scorsese movie that's going on, you know. And it's a nice way to write a song, that. It's because you don't ever feel like you can't think what the next scene is. Oh, she goes out into the street, doesn't she? Or she gets back into bed or something. And so we did it on that basis. And of course, you know, with Elvis, it was the thwarted, the love affair that's broken. You know, with me, it might have just been about her and stuff. But I think, you know, he introduced the sort of cynicism of the last verse and the records that had scratched. That was one of his images.
Here lies the powdered head.
Mighty Like a Rose was released. Elvis was completing work on the orchestral score for Alan Bleasdale's acclaimed television series GBH. Co-written with Richard Harvey, it was the clearest evidence of Elvis's recent passion for classical music. Pete Thomas, the only person to have played on every Costello album since 1978, has been well placed to observe the way Elvis periodically plunges into new areas of musical exploration.
See, Elvis has always done this through his career. He immerses himself in different kinds of music, and now, you know, he's into the classical stuff, you know, and he's always got a bag full of like 8 CDs, and he's got his nose in a book about like quite good pianists of the early 1730s, you know, and it's like sort of 4 inches thick, you know. It's like, I mean, seriously, you know, so he immerses himself in all these things, and basically it's like he writes great songs, and it's like, what else are you going to do? Who else are you going to go and play with that writes songs anywhere near as good, you know, that tunes anywhere near as good? And I'm sorry, I like playing good tunes.
Nick Lowe is another colleague in no doubt about the depth of Elvis's talent.
Most people who were any good would go through periods of not just thinking, but knowing that they're hopeless, that they're frauds and charlatans, and in fact their talent is just because you can't touch it. It's something that they dreamt or they imagined that they had, and they plunge to the depths of despair, and then the next minute quite the opposite happens, that they're so filled with their own talent they can practically bite it, you know, and they feel invincible, and so most of the best artists, I think, do have this. So go sweeping up and down, and you grab a bit of it on the way, you know, try and explain it, a bit of it on the way up or down, you know. And sometimes it might be a happy thing, or sometimes it might be a low-down thing. He's just trying to explain himself, and it just makes me think that what a great artist he is. You know, I haven't come in here just to be on the wireless, you know. I assure you of that. That doesn't, you know, it's not what I live and breathe for, you know. I'm here because I'm very flattered that I've been asked to come, and I really believe that Elvis Costello is a great artist. He's a great artist, and he'll get better. You know, he's one of those people who will get better. He's not one of those people whose, you know, time has come and gone. he'll go, you know, he'll have a little doldrum time, you know, and then he'll have another thing, you know. But he's one of those people who will get better and better and better, in my opinion. I tell you what, I've got to go and have a slash.
No problem, Nick. We don't need you anymore. And we've got to leave the last word to Elvis.
I've got so many albums that I want to make. Still, you know, my responsibility is to myself to put stuff out there. Now, the variety of responses to it, I can't condition and I can't demand. I have the responsibility wholly to myself. But I do take what I do very seriously. At the same time, it is only records, you know. If you don't like this one, maybe you'll like the next one. They're not all a series of red buses that are all the same, you know. But there will be another one. And I'm always amused by how people think that everything you do is an irredeemable step towards a preordained fate. I might go on to, you know, make the record that convinces everybody that I have really gone mad, and, you know, but equally I might make it with a comb and tissue paper. Who can say? You know, I haven't written songs yet. You know, it's just music that people can take out of it whatever they want. And if they don't want to listen to it, then listen to something else or make your own music, you know, and get off my case.
Thank you for the day.
BBC Radio 1FM's series on Elvis Costello was presented by Nicky Campbell and co-written by Pete Frame and the producer Kevin Howlett. Next week, you can hear The Sidemen featuring keyboard player Ian McLagan.
Thank you, Radio 1FM.